Property advice is actually more complicated than superannuation advice. I know, there's a lot of legislation and regulation around superannuation, but hear me out. See, we all know that super is complicated, but the problem is with property, most of us think it's actually easy. We think we should be able to work it out, and that's one of the big dangers, because we don't turn to experts when we probably should. Where with superannuation, of course we're going to turn to an expert. Well, we sort of have to really, because it's really easy not to comply. But with property, how do you even work out who an expert is? Let's face it, with superannuation, people who operate in that space actually have qualifications, whereas property is the Wild West. But here's the thing, with superannuation, you'd never trust a recent graduate, somebody with 1 year experience with your entire super portfolio, would you? But in the property space, there's a proliferation of experts who've only got 1 or 2 years experience. Now, you can't learn the rules of the property market at university, granted, but I tell you what, you need more than 1 or 2 years in the property market to learn the rules of the game. Because you might think property is regulated, but it isn't. One stark area of difference is in the transparency of fund performance. With a superannuation fund, you've got quarterly, annual reports, you've got benchmarks. You can actually measure their performance against other super funds. With property, well, let's face it, it often takes 5 or 10 years before you can review and determine whether you've actually made a good property investment. And by that time, you've missed a whole heap of opportunity. Now, with property investments, measurements are murky. Most people don't even think of benchmarking, let alone know how to do it. And there's a very real possibility of information overload. What data matters? Who can you trust? And there's a real temptation to focus on yield as a measurement. However, that's a red herring. There's a fallacy of control when it comes to property investment. We know we can't access our super balance until we get to that right age, but we do feel like we have lots of choice and freedom when it comes to managing our investments outside of super. And it's that fallacy of control that leads us to think that we've got more influence than we really do when it comes to making property decisions. Possibly the worst example of this is actually when people don't actually view their super balance as their money. If their employer's been putting contributions into their account for years, they sort of think of it as separate to their own investment. Many people actually fell into the trap of taking control over that money that they didn't actually think was theirs in the first place. One of the worst examples was an Uber driver that told me that he'd bought 2 Toowoomba apartments off the plan in his self-managed super fund because it's not my money anyway, so I might as well invest it in property. Oh my God, that's a whole other video for me to explain why that was a diabolical decision. We need more truth, transparency, and trust in the property industry. And if you want to join the conversation, please leave a comment.